This is a guy that you hope will come in 2025 and can be a rotational player and can bring some of that shooting off the bench that you highlighted. But really, this is a player that you hope in the coming years is going to develop into somebody that is your stalwart wing combo guard type player. Pay heed, all who enter, and beware this podcast. That's right. This is the Pay Heed podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer, and of course, I'm here with Kevin Flaherty, and we are recording minutes after some breaking news on the KU basketball front that we'll be diving into on today's show as Kansas lands a new commitment that's going to be joining them in 2025. Before we get into that, of course, as always, if you have not already, please subscribe on Apple, Spotify, on the audio platforms. Also over on our YouTube channel, you can subscribe there, drop a comment, share your thoughts, like the channel. We are pushing for 1,000 subscribers. We're close to 950 right now. So if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button. We really appreciate it. Tell your friends, tell your family about us. And if you haven't already, again, do that and join our growing KU community base that we have here on KCSN and a part of this show. You can also leave us a 5-star rating and review as well on Apple, Spotify, and wherever you listen on the audio side as well. We so greatly appreciate those of you that have done all those things. And again, if you haven't, it takes only a few minutes. Go ahead and do that. Also, if you are a golfer, if you are an avid golfer, the KCSN annual golf tournament is happening August 18th. In Creekmore, Missouri. If you'd like more information, there's a link in the description of the show to check that out. They've got always some fantastic prizes that you can sign up for. It's obviously a great cause for the KCSN Foundation that helps out the local community in the Kansas City area. So it's a win-win for everybody. You can get some of your friends together, play some golf at a great golf course, and also support KCSN and support the local community as well. So,
are you going to be playing in that, Nick?
I probably will not be playing. No, I will more than likely be there if I had to guess. I was there last year.
I'll be there as well. So, I mean,
yeah,
it should be
so,
you can come on.
There you go.
And get a chance to talk to the Pay Heed guys. I'm not sure I'm allowed to play golf when other people are around because I'm a hazard. Everybody in my general vicinity, but I should be there as well, and so it should be a great time.
So there you go. If you need another reason to go, you could have a chance to talk with us in person there also. I was there last year. It was a great time. Tons of great people from the Kansas City community. A lot of times, many people from KCSN are there. So if you are a KCSN listener of other shows, the Chiefs or whatever else, tons of guys are there from there as well. So it's a really, really fun time. So check that out once again in the description of the show. Okay, let's get to business here, Kevin, with the breaking news happening on Tuesday morning as we record. And that is that Kansas has landed a commitment from Kohl Rosario. He is a player that we touched on in our last show, a guy that was listed in the 2026 class at a high school, but the impression was that he was looking to reclassify into 2025. That was maybe what he was hoping to do. And his stock really started rising over the course of spring. He played in a couple of different tournaments and whatnot, and his stock really rose. And Kansas jumped on him and was recruiting him pretty heavily. And I get the sense, Kevin, that this is one where Kansas, knowing what maybe had happened previously with some recruitments over the course of this spring and into the summer, really wanted to lock this one down. This is obviously at a position of need as well. He's a 6'5" wing. He's got a college-ready body, I think. If you watch him, if you see any clips of him, he's a pretty strong kid, so he should be ready to go. But this was a big position of need for Kansas, and they got a guy that has been trending upward significantly over the past couple of months.
Yeah, a reclassify, right? Because he started off in 25, went to 2026, came back to 2025. Nick, I talked to a friend of mine who does a great job scouting high school guys and everything with an eye toward the NBA draft. And so he looks at these guys and looks at them not just, hey, how will these guys be in college, but also, is this a guy that I need to keep an eye on for the future? And he thought this would be a great get for Kansas because he thought when you look at the roster that the Jayhawks have, when you look at guys like Darren Peterson, some of the guys that they've got around him, Kohl Rosario isn't going to be asked to come in and carry the show. And when you look at sort of what his skill set is, you touched on a lot of it. He has that college-ready body. He's got good length. He's a very good vertical athlete, can really jump. And one of the intriguing things I think about this, Nick, is he really shot the cover off the ball this past spring. And so didn't necessarily have like the long-term shooting resume that maybe you see with certain guys, but the stroke is projectable. It looks good coming out of his hand. There's no hitches there. And so I think you can project that, hey, this is a guy that's going to be able to shoot the ball well. He certainly shot the ball really well this spring and summer. And the other thing that the friend that I talked about is this is a guy that's really good at transition. And so if you were looking at, hey, what would KU like to have as a wing in the rotation? You would want some positional size, which he has, both virtue of being 6'5", having the length, having the bulk, like you talked about as well. You'd want somebody who can make open shots, right? And somebody who could be an athlete that could help you out in transition when you get out and run after stops. And so he checks all those boxes. And Nick, we talked about this a little bit talking about centers, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that as the show goes on, as that's kind of the one real remaining need for this team. But when you were looking at a wing to bring in, you didn't necessarily want to bring in a guy that was only going to be here for 1 year, right? You wanted somebody that was going to be okay being in the rotation, maybe even playing a big role in your rotation, but was also going to be somebody that in 26, 27 was going to be potentially a piece. And I think Kohl Rosario checks all those boxes.
Yeah, the caveat to that being obviously the nature of college sports nowadays is you certainly hope a player like this does stick around, because I think you're absolutely right. I think this is a guy that you hope will come in 2025 and can be a rotational player and can bring some of that shooting off the bench that you highlighted. But really, this is a player that you hope in the coming years is going to develop into somebody that is your stalwart wing combo guard type player. I think that's sort of maybe if you were to look at the projection aspect of him heading forward. But strictly for 2025, I think you kind of hit it on the head with the to me, the biggest headline of it is his shooting. He shot the ball incredibly well. Kansas certainly, I think, was looking for another shooter. In the statement that Kansas put out with Bill Self, he highlighted that, saying, and then basically in the press release about Rosario signing, had mentioned that he feels that Kohl brings a perimeter athletic shooting standpoint that is something that this roster needed. And I think I would agree with that, right? I mean, we've talked about 3-point shooting. Obviously, it's been a bit of a lightning rod issue, I think, for the better part of really the past couple seasons, truthfully, for Kansas, because they haven't been an effective 3-point shooting team. And with the state of the game seemingly going more and more in that direction, when you look at some other schools around the country leaning into it, Kansas hasn't really chosen to do that. But this is a player that can bring that 3-point shooting aspect. And he did shoot the ball very, very well this spring. And that was, I think, a significant part of him rising so much in the rankings, right? And if you look at 24/7 Sports, he actually doesn't have a ranking yet. I'm assuming that's because of his reclass, right? Like they had him ranked for 2026 and don't have him ranked for in 2025 yet. But his stock was certainly rising. A lot of big time schools wanted him. Duke wanted him. Miami, Florida State, Oregon. Those were some of the other top schools that were after him. But Kansas was able to lock it down. And if he is a guy that comes in and is able to provide a little bit of that perimeter shooting off the bench and maybe that athletic spark as well, I think that's a pretty big win for Kansas in 2025 this season. To me, those are the things that if he brings that, you're thinking, okay, this was a very, very good addition for Kansas because they definitely needed that from the wing spot, right? I mean, we talked about it. The wing spot was a pretty big need, and I think he does check some boxes in that area to really help out KU in terms of, hey, we need some perimeter spark off the bench. Kohl Rosario can come in. And the other aspect of it that I would say typically I'm hesitant about, but in this case I think it should be okay, is I never like to put a heaping amount of expectations on a player like this who is reclassifying, as you said, previously from 25 to 26, now back to 25, but reclassifying into 2025, also going to be joining the team this late in the summer, right? Or this late in the process. Like, I'm not one to throw a lot of expectations on him because of all those things. But I think when you look around, you recognize Rosario doesn't need to have a lot of expectations on him coming into this team, right? He's not going to be expected to come in and be a big time player right away. Like, he's going to have an opportunity to really grow into his role with this team, which I think is a big positive, a really big positive, because, I think with Johnny Furphy, we kind of saw kind of the same thing where nobody really knew what to expect with him. The expectations were low, and then obviously he blossomed into a really phenomenal player for KU late in the season. I'm not saying Rosario will do that, but I'm saying I like the idea that it's of a similar timetable of, hey, you're joining the team later in the process, but there's no expectation of you being a real impact player right away. So you have time to sort of understand your role, have time to sort of get acclimated before, maybe then the expectations come of, okay, hey, we need you off the bench that we, X, Y, Z. So I do like that. Normally I'm concerned about it. In this case, I think considering the circumstances, it's something that shouldn't be too much of an issue considering what KU is probably going to be expecting of him when he first arrives on campus.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up Furphy, because I'm not saying that the outcome is going to be the same, but I think it's somewhat similar in terms of bringing him in and his place within sort of that initial roster. Furphy was a guy that really kind of grew into a role that you didn't necessarily think that he would have on that team. You didn't think that, hey, this is a guy that is going to wind up starting 18 games, I think is what he wound up starting that year. And if you look at it through December or so, right about, he was a bench piece, and he was somebody that didn't have to be a complete player even when he joined the starting lineup. They weren't asking Johnny Furphy to, hey, go out and be a star player on this roster, because they had other pieces around him. And I think it's very similar here, Nick, where it's you're not expecting, obviously, Kohl Rosario to come in this year and wind up being a draft pick like Johnny Furphy was after 1 year, but it is somewhat similar in that you're bringing a guy in. He seems to have a role and a fit where he doesn't have to be a complete basketball player right away. He can be, hey, knock down open shots, get out in transition, work on defense, and you'll carve out a role for yourself. And he can kind of grow from there. And if he winds up carving out a much bigger role, that's either really positive because he winds up being better than maybe you thought he would be early on, or, everything went to heck. One of the reasons that Johnny Furphy wound up having such a big role, in addition to Johnny Furphy, like you said, sort of blossoming, was some of the pieces around Johnny Furphy weren't working out. And so that opportunity was there. And I think this gives you versatility in that wing group. It also gives you some cover just in case, hey, this guy isn't working out, this guy isn't making shots, this guy maybe isn't what you think he is. He's somebody that has some value as sort of a backstop as well.
I also think this probably pretty much closes the door on Cam McDowell, another guy we talked about who had visited KU previously, a Division II transfer. Kansas probably was looking for really only one more real wing spot, and they decided to sort of go all in on Kohl Rosario in this particular instance, and so I would think that pretty much means that the ship has left the port on Cam McDowell being at Kansas.
Yeah, I would 100% agree. I don't think that they have room really for more wings. If they do take a wing, I think it would probably be like a multi-positional, almost like jumbo wing who could play the four. That you could, pull off Trey White for here and there, somebody who's maybe like 6'8" or so that could play some three if you needed him to, but ultimately gives you somebody that can spell Trey White, would be the one sort of exception to the rule as far as bringing in a wing, if you will. I think, and I'm sure we'll get to this, I think the big need that's still out there is obviously, who's going to back up Flory at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's talk about that a little bit more. We'll talk about where Kansas sits from a roster-wide perspective, sort of from a big picture perspective with the addition of Kohl Rosario and more. We'll do that coming up right after this. Looking for tickets for your next event? Tickets for Less is your number one source. Save big on every purchase when you use promo code KCSN at ticketsforless.com.
I'm BJ Kissel, founder and CEO of KC Sports Network. Emprise Bank has been with us from the beginning. They were our first network partner, and they believed in the vision of what we were building from the start. I can't speak to any other banks or companies and how they operate, but I can tell you from personal experience and based on the growth of the network you're listening to right now, that if you have banking needs, call our friends at Emprise Bank. We've worked with so many great people there over the years, from Vicky and Aggie to Andrea, Lori, Jackie, Deb, and Aaron, and not to mention so many others that not just supported KC Sports Network, but supported our KCSN Foundation as well. But the best thing that I know is that if I have a question or a problem, no matter how dumb the question is, I know who I'm going to call and who I'm going to talk to. And I know that I'm getting an answer from someone that I can trust. And I know that person is there to help us. That's why Emprise Bank has always been and continues to be our partner in Possible. And they can be yours too. You just have to reach out. If you have a banking need, whether it's business or personal, hit me up. I will connect you directly with the same people that have helped us build KCSN. And that's our friends at Emprise Bank.
Folks, there's nothing that beats relaxing on a hot summer day and watching some baseball. And there's no simpler way to get in on the action than by downloading the Pick 6 app from DraftKings. It's crazy simple. Just pick more or less on the stats for 2 or more of your favorite players, and boom, you're in the mix for big cash prizes. And the best part, Pick 6 is available right here in Missouri. Don't miss out on the fun. Don't settle for a smaller payout. Switch to Pick 6, and right now, new customers can get $25 in bonus picks with their first deposit of $5. Here's what you got to do. Download the DraftKings Pick 6 app now and use code KCSN. That's code KCSN for new customers to get $25 in bonus picks with their first deposit of $5. Better payouts, bigger wins, only with Pick 6 from DraftKings. The crown is yours. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Void where prohibited. New customers only. Minimum $5 deposit. Bonus picks expire 168 hours after issuance. For additional terms and responsible gaming resources, see pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
This is the Paid Podcast on the Kansas City Sports Network. I'm Nick Springer, along with Kevin Flaherty. We're brought to you by Emprise Bank, your part on all things possible. And remember, FDIC. As I mentioned at the top of the show, if you haven't already, please subscribe. Apple, Spotify, and on our YouTube channel. You can drop a comment. You can share your thoughts. You can join the conversation. We've got some excellent people that share their comments on our YouTube channel. Excuse me. We read them. We do see them as well. So really appreciate you doing that. And please continue to do that. It means a lot to us to see your support for the show via comments, subscription, liking the show, all those things. So yeah, towards the end of that conversation there, Kevin, we kind of got into it, looking more at the big picture with Rosario added to the roster. At the top, you got Darren Peterson, you got Marco Jackson, you got Jaden Dawson as sort of your main guards. You've got Melvin Council. You add in Kohl Rosario, and a lot of those guys I think are pretty interchangeable. You know, the one thing about this roster when you start to look at it, Kevin, is they got a handful of guys that are in that 6'4", 6'5" range that I think is going to allow them to have a lot of positional versatility at times. And you think about Bill Self on defense, Kansas typically switches a lot. And with the roster they have built there, it seems like they're going to be in position to continue to do that with the players they have.
Yeah, I think you can play some of those guys sort of up and down as you want. You know, if you wanted to put in a lineup that maybe has more shooting, you know, you could go with Kohl Rosario at the 3, Jaden Dawson at the 2, and have a lineup where you add Darren Peterson into that mix, who's a good shooter, and all of a sudden 1 through 3, you know, you're really a squad that can hit from the outside. At the same time, you know, there's some defensive groups in there. I think Marco Jackson's defensive potential is really high this year. And by the way, Nick, early buzz on this team has been very positive again on Marco Jackson. We've talked in the past on this show about how the buzz coming off of that freshman year with Marco was, okay, this is a different Marco that we're seeing. And then the Achilles thing happened. It sounds like the leadership has been excellent. It sounds like he's been playing really well. It would not surprise me at all to see Marco Jackson sort of play his hand to maybe even enter that starting lineup with Darren Peterson. I think Melvin Council is going to start. I know you're a big Melvin Council guy. I'm a big Melvin Council guy. But the point is just that, to your point, you know, what you were talking about, I mean, your point guard is 6'5", 6'6", and so you can put out some really big lineups, some lineups where you can switch around and do a lot of different things. Defensively, you can also mix and match sort of their skill sets, where you can have if you have Elmarco Jackson, Darren Peterson, and Melvin Counseley, you got three guys that can get downhill, really, really well and drive the ball. And so you can do some different things with that group. And I think that interchangeability and the versatility of that group is a major plus.
Yeah, we had a YouTube commenter a couple shows ago about talking about Melvin Counsell being really, really good, and I agree. There was no argument from us. Like, yes, yeah. I think he's going to be very, very good as well. He's going to be, I think, an elite defender for Kansas, and as you said, can get downhill and create some explosive plays at the rim as well for KU. So yeah, I think with the addition of Rosario, you look at the stable of guards that KU has, and that gives you, again, some back end shooting and back end additional athleticism as well that you can bring in also with not the expectation that he's going to be somebody that you're going to be needing to lean on, especially early in the year, right? Which I think is significant. And yeah, I loved what you said about Elmarco Jackson. I mean, the possibility of him being a starter next to Darren Peterson could be very significant, because him playing without the ball in his hands almost seems more dangerous to me, because you can get it to him and he can cut and use his speed and do what he does best. So that's a very intriguing prospect. You did mention it. As far as the rest of the roster, you look down low, and that is the area where Kansas still has its biggest need, because you have Flory Badunga, you have Trey White, you have Bryson Tiller. But again, you would still love to add in an additional player or two at that spot. And by the way, with the addition of Kohl Rosario, Kansas now technically does have still two spots available at this stage. And I kind of wanted to ask you about that. We think at this point, Kansas certainly is leaving one of those spots for a big man. The two names that we talked about on our previous show continue to be the two guys I think to keep an eye on, which is Egi Demir from Turkey and Paul Mbaya, who was previously committed to NC State but has since decommitted. Those certainly are two of the two big men I think that you have to keep your eyes on at this stage if you're a KU fan, in terms of who KU could be looking to add. But going beyond that, you still have one more spot if that happens. What do you think KU would look for with that final spot on the roster?
Yeah, I'm going to throw out a name here, and it's not necessarily, hey, they're going to get this guy, but I think he's kind of the archetype that you're looking for, and that's the Kareem Conan guy out of Turkey. When you look at him being a 6'8" guy, plays some three, plays some four, is a really high-level defender, really, really good athlete. I think somebody like that you could – kind of slide into that spot where he can give you a bigger wing if you needed it. If you really wanted to go with the 6'8" guy at the three, you could. But he's also somebody that can give Trey White some breaks, because I'm not sure Trey White has a real, quote unquote, like for like replacement at this point. Bryson Tiller is a guy that I think is probably more 4 than 5, but obviously it's been a while since Bryson Tiller has played basketball. And so you're wondering a little bit what that transition is going to be like. Calderon is a guy that has some athleticism at that size, is pretty raw. You maybe be asking, too much for him to play a huge role right away at that spot. And so I think one of those spots is absolutely allocated for a backup big. I don't think anybody would debate that. Like you said, Egi Demir, I think is probably the more likely of those two. If you were to sort of handicap this in a betting way and say, who is Kansas more likely to get, I would probably put more chips in that direction. I think Paul Mbaya is a higher ceiling guy. And you look at the guy, just has a ridiculous wingspan, is a terrific shot blocker. And the thought of basically pulling Flory off the court and putting in a shot blocker like Paul Mbaya, who would be another elite guy. I mean, offenses would just sort of be like, oh gosh, like what do you do in this situation? And so I think Paul Mbaya is the big swing. I think Demir is probably more likely at this point. I definitely think there's going to be a backup big. But to your point of what happens after that point, or what happens with that last roster spot, I do think maybe the ideal fit is going to be somebody that can be sort of either a big wing 4 type of guy that can slide and give them some cover there, just in case Bryson Tiller isn't really ready to go in that role.
Yeah, I would agree, because you look at the stable of guards like we just highlighted a few minutes ago: Darren Peterson, Marco Jackson, Jaden Dawson, Melvin Council. Now you add in Rosario. Like, that's a pretty good group.
Yeah.
Of guards / wing combo players. But then you go to the wing spot. Obviously, they just added Rosario, and you have Trey White, and you can interchange some of those guys like we talked about. But certainly the depth becomes less as you move into the front court. And then again with Flory and Bryson Tiller, absolutely couldn't agree more on the big. And I also agree with your assessment as well in that I think Demmer, we kind of talked about a little bit on our last show. You know, Demmer has basically already been playing the role overseas that he would essentially be asked to play at Kansas, which is 15 minutes per game, be an energy guy, you know, crash the glass. And Mbaya, as you mentioned, probably does have the higher ceiling, maybe, in terms of if you're thinking even like NBA possibilities. But also, would he be looking for somewhere where he's going to have a bigger role already this year? Or how would that fit in exactly with KU? The one thing I will say about Demmer, and I don't know if this is specifically an issue with Demmer, but we talked about it with Bryce Desire, the other big man that KU was interested in. And I think this could apply to Kareem Conan, who you mentioned as well, is some of these guys have played multiple seasons professionally overseas, and that is seemingly coming up as a potential roadblock with the NCAA for some of those guys coming to play and college basketball. Conan's a guy that's already played, I think, 4 years professionally in Turkey. So that's something to keep an eye on. I'm not saying it's specifically an issue for those players. Like I said, with Desire, it seemed like that was maybe one of a handful of issues potentially. Yeah. Demmer obviously is a player who, when we talked about him on our last show, had committed to play college basketball back in 2022, ended up not working out for him. So he's obviously now had a couple seasons professionally as well. And the NCAA, you know, I always like to make fun of the NCAA, Kevin, because typically they are too scared to take a stand because they are afraid they get sued, and they almost always lose their lawsuits. Well, look, I got to give credit where credit is due. The NCAA is winning lawsuits now. So shout out to the NCAA's lawyers. Zakai Ziegler sued for an additional year, got turned down. So the NCAA may be feeling more emboldened about challenging some of these rulings, I guess, for players playing college basketball. So I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there as well.
Yeah, and you've got, you know, the political climate too, in terms of it being difficult to. This isn't a political comment or anything like that. It's just right now it is more difficult to get guys to come in when they are international players. That's something to be considered as well. But like you said, it's another roadblock. It doesn't necessarily mean you can't clear it. It doesn't mean that these guys are 100% not going to be eligible, and you know, KU is screwed at this point. That's not what we're saying at all. It does make the Kohl Rosario thing, you know, kind of a nice little, you know, tied up package, in that you didn't have to worry about the eligibility stuff, and you could just go ahead, sign him, get him in the boat. But that is something that you really need to consider with international players right now, is you can see a guy and be like, okay, this guy would absolutely help Kansas in 25, 26. Actually getting that guy to campus, getting him cleared by the NCAA, getting the visas and everything approved, that's a little bit more of a challenge right now. And so I think that, to your point, it's so easy to sit here and daydream about, you know, every international player that pops up on the radar. The truth is that some of these guys are probably going to find a way to get through, and they're going to play college basketball next season, and some of them aren't. And it's really difficult to tell right now. It's always been difficult with the NCAA because the NCAA throughout its history has pretty much ignored precedent, right? You know, what happened over here earned this sort of penalty, and then, you know, something happens over here and the penalty is totally different, even though they look like it's an apples to apples comparison. What was the Jerry Tarkanian quote? Like, the NCAA is so pissed that Kentucky had added another year to Cleveland State's probation, or something like that. I mean, and even now, or especially now with the way things are going and the lawsuits that you mentioned and everything, it's really tough to look at a guy and claim prior precedent and say, okay, this guy got through. His situation is similar to Paul Mbaya or Egi Demir or whoever. Those guys are going to get through. You can't do that, and that's unfortunate, and it adds an extra layer here. And it sounds trite to say it, but that's why the KU guys make the big bucks, is they have to find out not just, hey, can this guy help Kansas, but can we even get him here? And that's becoming a harder and harder thing to target, I think, right now.
By the way, Kohl Rosario, signed, sealed, delivered. He is signed. Obviously, I think based off of some of the previous recruitments of Kansas, people, when they hear committed, they're like, well, okay, maybe, with guys like Dame Sarr or Darian Williams. Rosario is signed. He will be in a Kansas jersey in later this year.
He signed. They got the press release. Shout out Chris Tyson. We got the quote from Bill Self. So it is
done. It is a done deal. Let's play a little bit of a hypothetical game here to end the show. You talked about the big man. Let's say Kansas adds Egi Demir. Let's just say hypothetically. It hasn't happened yet, but we think one of those guys potentially is going to come to Kansas. Let's just say it's Egi Demir. Taking a step back and kind of setting aside that last scholarship. Let's just kind of ignore that for a second. They add Demir. You look at the roster. What is the ceiling versus the floor of that team with Rosario and Demir added in to all the other guys we've already talked about? What is the ceiling and floor of that Kansas team?
I think it could be a Final Four team. And I know, there will be some people who will be shocked based on the offseason and, oh, you missed on this guy, you missed on that guy. But I think one of the things about this team is it fits, Nick. And I think the chemistry, by all reports so far, is really, really good. And the thing that I feel like people keep forgetting in all of this, because you want all the pieces to be really good, Kansas could have the best player in college basketball next year. If you're talking about the ceiling is Darren Peterson being the best player in college basketball. And that's not an outrageous ceiling. That's not a crazy thing to say. And if Darren Peterson is the best player in college basketball, if Flory Badunga is a future first-round pick, if Melvin Council is as good as we think he can be, if El Marco Jackson continues to grow it and develop and be the guy that people are kind of talking about him being right now, Trey White, I think, is a really good fit on this roster, because he does a lot of the things that don't necessarily show up in a box score but are important to win. And then you add in the depth. You look at a guy like, Jaden Dawson, who may be a starter, maybe a sixth man, really fits this roster, I think, in terms of his shooting and the scoring and things that he can bring. You look at Kohl Rosario, having the depth at the different spots, having, in this case, a guy like Egi Demir as Flory's backup. I really do think that you could have a Final Four team. Like, would it surprise you if Darren Peterson in that group, Darren Peterson has a good 4 games and you wind up winning those 4 games? And I would not be surprised by that. I think that's the ceiling.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say, for the floor, you could argue that, hey, Flory is going to be raw. Darren Peterson maybe has some growing pains that you're not expecting, but people are able to get after him because the pieces around him maybe don't work out. And so they're able to get after Darren Peterson with really high-level athletes at the college basketball level that would certainly be a step up from what he faced in high school. And like I said, maybe Flory is still raw. He doesn't take the leap. They don't have enough shooting and all of those things. I still think you're talking about a team that's probably going to win at least a game in the NCAA tournament. I think that there's too much talent there on the upper end. Like I said, I do think that this is a group that fits together well. And I think they're a group that fits Bill Self well, and a group that Bill Self, is going to know how to coach and motivate and whatever this group in a way that maybe hasn't been the same the last few years. And so I do think that this is a team that maybe doesn't have, I think, the ceiling of the last few years, if everything had worked out positively, might have even been higher than this year's ceiling. I mean, you saw it when, Kansas basically really outplayed Houston only to lose it in the final couple minutes this past year. Houston, of course, right there for a national title, could have, should have. They beat Duke. They beat UConn the previous year. I get that Castle was out, et cetera. The ceiling on those teams might have even been a little bit higher, but I think the floor was a lot lower, Nick. And I think that's one of the things with this year's team, because I think of the fit, because I think the chemistry, I think they're going to defend at a really high level. And so that brings the floor up where it's just kind of like, hey, maybe the jump shot's not always going to travel. Maybe they're going to win some games 63-59, but they can win that way. And I'm not sure that the teams the last few years really had that, at the same level. And so I think the ceiling may be slightly lower than the last couple of years. I still think the ceiling, is there for them to be a Final Four team. And, shoot, once you get to the Final Four, anything can happen. But I think the floor is going to be higher on this year's team because of the fit. What do you think?
Well, let me throw something at you.
Okay, all right.
I think that Bill Self may have even said this at some point when talking about Darren Peterson, that he's basically the best prospect or the best player he's recruited since Andrew Wiggins, right?
Yeah.
Going back to that team, Andrew Wiggins and Joel Embiid, right? Darren Peterson, Flory Badunga. Are there similarities? Now, obviously, in that particular season, Joel Embiid ends up getting hurt, which kind of affects things. But is that a fair team to look at and say, okay, you've got the number one player, by many the best player in college basketball, going to be the number one overall pick in the NBA draft. You've got a big man who is raw but has that high ceiling as well. I mean, is that something you can look at and compare to a little bit, you think?
Maybe a little bit. I think Melvin Council is probably going to be better than Wayne Selden was as a freshman. And when you look at that point guard spot, that was kind of a moving target for that team kind of throughout that year. It was Nadir Tharp, but Tharp was really inconsistent. By the end of the year, Connor Frankamp was maybe their better point guard and certainly played like it against Stanford in the game that they wound up losing. I'm not sure they have a number 3 point guard like Frank Mason. I get that Frank Mason was a freshman. It wasn't, all caps Frank Mason yet, but I do think the talent on that team, and maybe, the NBA talent or however you want to put it was a little bit higher. But at the same time, I think that you could have a similar thing in that there were sometimes that team won games just because Andrew Wiggins and Joel Embiid were Andrew Wiggins and Joel Embiid. And I think that you could have some similar stuff here. The Embiid was so much fun to watch that year because his growth curve was so absurd, in terms of he would struggle with something in December and by late December, he would be good at it. And it just kind of, and he never, the injury stunk because you never really got to see sort of peak Embiid from that year. Well, Flory's been in Kansas's program a year longer. And so I would expect more consistent results from Flory than you saw from Embiid there. But I think you're going to have those Embiid moments where there were some moments where you felt like, oh my gosh, Embiid, should be the number one pick. Look at what he's doing out there. I don't know that Flory's gonna be, he's the number one pick, but I do think you're gonna have some similar moments where Flory is able to take control of games with his defense, his athleticism, and the ways that they're going to use him. And so I do like that part of it, and that I do think that Kansas can struggle maybe in some ways. Maybe Jaden Dawson's not making shots that game. Maybe Melvin Council's in foul trouble. And Kansas wins because it's got Darren Peterson and Flory Badunga, and both of them are NBA guys.
Yeah, I mean, I talked about it before. I think to go back to what your ceiling versus floor conversation was, I think absolutely this Kansas team could make the Final Four because of Darren Peterson. I mean, I think Duke last year was probably had some better NBA talent all across the board, but Darren Peterson, I think if he has a Cooper Flag-esque type season and level of impact, that automatically to me puts Kansas in the conversation for being at least a second weekend team, and certainly in the running for being a Final Four team when you consider from that standpoint. I mentioned this earlier, I think as well, maybe back in earlier in the spring, but I don't think you can overstate like how good Darren Peterson is going to be. My expectations for him are beyond the roof. Like to quote Michael Jordan, the ceiling is the roof with Darren Peterson. I can't overstate it enough how good I think he's going to be. And so because of that, as you said, that alone to me sets Kansas up in a situation where they can be in that conversation, right? Maybe they aren't a 1 or a 2 seed. Maybe they end up being, a 3 seed or whatever it may be. But that to me, they still, because of Peterson, are going to have that chance to make that deep run.
Yeah, I think they're super dangerous because of that. I mean, every time you roll out a basketball this year, Nick, KU's probably going to have the best guy on the court. And it's really hard to put a value on that. And, even to your Cooper Flagg example, Cooper Flagg was a big. Like, I know that he did a lot of different things, but in college basketball, we've seen, when you've had a team that's guard driven by a guard who is terrific, whether that's Kemba Walker, whether that's any number of teams, that's a guy that can drive you in March, where he can basically roll out of bed, score 32 points in that round of 32 get you in and you win. And I think with Peterson, I think the thing that gets slept on a little bit, Nick, is yes, Peterson is going to drop 32 points in the game this year. It's going to happen. Like he's really, really good. I think people sleep on the playmaking chops and the ability to get teammates involved and understand that part of it. And so there's also probably going to be some games there where maybe Peterson has 14, maybe he has 15. He might have 7 assists or multiple big kickouts or whatever. And this is even a small thing, but we've talked about it, Nick. I think this is going to be a lot better rebounding team, in part because Darren Peterson rebounds like he's a 4. And he's the size of some 4s. He's almost the size of KJ Adams. And so when you look at least from a height perspective, and so when you look at that part of it and his ability to impact multiple phases of a game, I think you really can see a situation where he carries this team in March. And the scary thing about it, Nick, is if Council's as good as we think he can be, if Flory develops the way that we think Flory is able to, he might not have to carry this team. But I think that's what gives this team its ceiling, is the fact that Darren Peterson can always just flip a switch and be Darren Peterson, and Kansas could win a basketball game.
We will be continuing to monitor the last 2 spots open for KU. Kohl Rosario signed with Kansas earlier this morning on Tuesday. So Kansas one step closer to finalizing their roster for the 2025 season. And you heard it from Kevin and myself. Final 4, I think, is still very much a realistic possibility for this team. I think the ceiling is very high for this team. And this could be a team, Kevin, and I think KU fans would actually probably like this even more. This could be a team that is preseason 10 to 15 range, but maybe because of that, people, I guess, quote unquote, sleep on them a little bit and they end up being even better. And I think you'd much prefer that than what has happened to KU the past couple seasons, where they're preseason number 1 and they end up falling apart a little bit. So I'm excited about it. But yeah, Rosario adds in some additional shooting and athleticism off the bench, and this Kansas team getting closer and closer to being finalized heading into the fall. Of course, we are also now less than 2 months away from football season.
Yes.
With Kansas football going to be taking the field in week 0 coming up in less than 2 months. So we're going to be talking more about that, starting to look deeper into KU football, previewing the upcoming season, and much more. So tons of reasons to stay subscribed, stay tuned over the course of the summer leading into football season. We're very excited about football season. We're going to be bringing you as many live shows as we can in post-game, after all of KU football games as well. So you'll want to stay subscribed. Those are going to be on our YouTube channel. So you'll absolutely want to be subscribed for that as well. And we will go from there. So, Kevin, you got anything else to add for our great listeners before we wrap up the show today?
No, it's nice. We talked about it right before we went on, Nick. It's nice to actually have an addition as opposed to the hypotheticals that we've had for sort of weeks and weeks and weeks. But no, good addition. I think we've mentioned all of the reasons why. I do want to ask though, Nick, I feel like maybe later this week we should do our safeties episode.
Yes, we have been delaying our safeties episode, breaking down KU football. It's the only position group we have left. And there's
It's
just
the
been
back line, right? Like
there's just been more KU basketball news happening at a steady flow that we haven't had a chance to really sit down and talk about it. So yeah, we're going to talk about that probably later in the week and talk about KU football more as well. We haven't had a KU football show in a little bit. There's just been a steady flow of KU basketball news. So yes, please stay tuned for more KU football coverage as well. We're going to be talking about that as well. If you're looking for your KU football fix, we'll have you covered later in the week. Got anything else? Anything else you want to throw?
Yes. One more thing. I'm sure you saw the thing about KU playing Missouri in women's basketball this year.
Yes.
That could be a lot of fun. I don't know our viewers how much are into KU women's basketball, but we had Morgan Page on our show, talking about how good this recruiting class that Kansas brought in is going to be, and a really fun early, or I guess mid-November test for the Jayhawks. I think that may be one I'll try to get to, Nick, if we can't get out there. I think obviously its place compared to KU's football schedule, we'll have to take a look at. But if you want to see the young Jayhawks get a chance, that could be a fun one to see just how good those young players are.
Yeah, you mentioned the recruiting class that KU added. Yeah, Kansas women's basketball the past couple of seasons has been phenomenal in recruiting. They've gotten a handful of 5-star players, so they've certainly got the pieces in place. And this could be the year where you start to see that come through with Samaya Nichols entering her 3rd season to Kansas as well. So yeah, I think exciting times for KU women's basketball as well in their quest to get back to the NCAA tournament and make a deep run. So good call out there as well. I think that's going to about do it for the show today, though. Once again, if you have not already, you can subscribe, like the show, drop a comment. Apple, Spotify, if you're on audio, you can subscribe there as well. Leave us a 5-star rating and review. Tons of ways to get in contact with the show. You can also find us on social media. At KCSN is our show account. You can find Kevin at Flaherty KCSN and myself at Springer. Nick Springer 29. So lots of ways to stay connected with the show. And by the way, if you are interested in a more KU football recruiting news, more local football recruiting news on the high school front, be sure to check out the Verbal Commitment Show with Kevin Flaherty and Ryan Wallace. They do a fantastic job covering all things happening on the high school recruiting front. And you'll certainly want to tune in, I think, in the coming weeks, because Ian Premer, the top player in the class of 2026, is going to be, I think, picking his school that he will be committing to coming up soon. So be sure to check out the Verbal Commitment Show as well if you want to stay up to date on the local high school recruiting front also. But until next time, he's Kevin Flaherty. I'm Nick Springer. We'll talk to you again soon. See ya.